Thank you for joining us again and welcome back to our channel. For those of you who watch our videos, we appreciate your time and we want to thank you for spending your days with us as always. Well, a number of things happening in the region. Africa is moving so fast. Sometimes we struggle to catch up with the geopolitical and also geo-economic changes in the region. The continent of Africa has decided to send a strong message to its geopolitical partners that it's not going to be business as usual. Africa is an important region and a number of countries and major superpowers are logging hands in the continent of Africa. That's to tell you why Africa, not just because of its population and resources, but more importantly that African nations have decided to start making the phone calls themselves. They don't want anyone to make the calls for them this time around. And what I'm talking about here is making more strategic options and very important decisions that will affect not just their own nations but their own people. Like we've always said on this channel, any country that does not understand geopolitics and geoeconomics will suffer. African nations have said that it will not be business as usual, as countries like the United States of America, Russia, and also European Union nations, including China, have decided to engage Africa. The one country that has looked at Africa to be a strategic region in the world for its own influence and its partnership, not just because of natural resources and security, but to engage Africa as an equal partner in a number of areas. That country is Russia. Most recently, the Russian foreign minister touched down into Senegal to send a strong message to countries like France that we are not just here for natural resources, but we really want to engage Africa from a different perspective. Let's watch this video from our friends from Al Jazeera and we will join you on the other side to break it down from the most simplest manner that the most common person who doesn't understand geopolitics can follow us. We will join you soon on the other side.
Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov has arrived in Guinea as he starts a three-country tour of West Africa. He's visited the continent several times in the past 2 years as Moscow looks to increase its influence there. Nicholas Hack has been more from Senegal.
So we're on our way to meet a Russia-Africa expert, and I've ordered a Yango, which is a Russian company here in Senegal that operates taxis. It's one of the many Russian companies that have started investing in West Africa. Russia has been winning hearts and minds, especially here in West Africa, thanks to videos that it publishes on social media, like this one that's on Telegram, where we see Russian fighters from the mercenary group, the Wagner group, handing out aid, and you can clearly see the Russian flag, and it shows Russia stepping in and succeeding where the West has failed. So our taxi driver is from neighboring Guinea, and that's where the Foreign Minister of Russia, Sergei Lavrov, is. He's there to try to talk about security, but also access to the untapped reserves of bauxite. And much of his trip is about not just security, but also access to minerals that Russia needs. When it comes to trade, Russia is lagging far behind the West, with only $14 billion traded last year. Let's compare that with the European Union that traded $300 billion worth of goods and services with Africa last year.
Russians are seen as an economic, security and strategic alternative to the West for the development of African states. And anything that bothers or diminishes the West seems popular with young Africans at the moment.
Vladimir Putin has rarely stepped foot on the African continent, but his chief diplomatic envoy has certainly multiplied his tours of the region, and this latest one comes at a time when Russia is increasingly isolated in the West, but certainly not here on the African continent. Nicholas Hack, Al Jazeera, Dakar.
As the Al Jazeera reporter clearly indicated there, that Russia has a particular strategy, as most Western countries have sidelined Russia with regards to the Russia-Ukraine war. The country have decided to start expanding its tentacles to regions where it considers as friends. Russia has decided that Africa is a very important area where it really wants to strengthen its hold from a more strategic options to increase its also influence in the region from a number of areas. If you look at what happened in Guinea, in Burkina Faso and Mali, the former colonial power France has lost incredible influence in the region, and France is still struggling to react with regards to engaging Africa, where we have seen the French president's policy in Africa is not holding ground. Emmanuel Macron has come under incredible pressure from France's parliamentarians and other French officials to ask the French president to explain its African policy. So far, we all are still monitoring things and we haven't seen that policy being explained. However, France is not giving up, as France continues to engage Africa from a different perspective. The Russians are telling the world and also the Western partners that Africa is an area where I have come to engage the region and I'm not going to go anywhere anytime soon. This is just the simple message. The fact that the West had cut off Russia from a number of financial issues and also transactional areas, Russia has decided to make western part of the continent of Africa and Africa in general to be the area where it feels that it can have a face-to-face engagement with the Western countries whom actually have cut it off from a number of areas. Russian foreign minister visit to Guinea is an indication to France again and other Western powers that this region is where I will be deciding how things work out from their own perspective. However, Guineans are also calling the shot themselves. Russia's foreign minister's visit there is an indication, it's a message that cannot be ignored by Paris. So let's listen to how this goes with regards to our friends, the African view's own perspective.
Upon his arrival in Guinea-Conakry, Sergei Lavrov, the head of Russian diplomacy, engaged in a meeting with his Guinean counterpart. Their discussions primarily focused on enhancing cooperation between Conakry and Moscow, covering a range of areas from economic development to military collaboration. After the meeting, Lavrov was introduced to the Guinean head of state, General Mamadi Doumbouya, at the presidential palace. During a joint press briefing, Lavrov highlighted the historical ties and long-standing friendship between Russia and Guinea. With the Republic of Guinea, we have been friends for a long time, since the independence of this country, since it freed itself from the colonial yoke, and it was at the time of the USSR and even after the Soviet Union. In addition, there is an agreement on the establishment of diplomatic relations with this country, and this agreement dates from 1958. Now we are working on development, on revitalization in our exchanges, and we welcome our colleagues in terms of economic development. There are Russian companies which operate, which still work in Guinea. It is also the Russian military training from which the Guinean officer cadets benefited, and after this training, they joined the Guinean army. There is also training cooperation in medicine, and I know that it is important to boost our cooperation in military and technical matters because there is always the question of increasing defense capacity on our agenda, and our bilateral agenda is positive. We confirmed that it was positive during my meeting with my counterpart, the Minister of Foreign Affairs, and during my meeting with the President. We are therefore planning to boost this relationship, this cooperation.
The fact in the matter is that the condescending approach and the imposition approach, where a number of Western nations and Africa's geopolitical partners still think in the colonial mindset that they really want to impose their own decision on the continent of Africa, I think that's not going to work. From a geopolitical aspect, African nations too have said they really want to be part of the decision-making process. Africa is facing enormous challenges with growing population and abundant natural resources and high unemployment rates in most countries, and they really want to charter a new part in their history and to work with partners that can also see things from their own perspective. That's the reason why China has engaged Africa from an economic perspective as well, and Russia is coming in with security issues, and to an extent they are working with some European partners and the United States of America. More importantly, Africa is sending the message that the condescending approach is not going to work. We all have seen what happened in the country of Niger. More importantly as well, a number of American diplomats who have engaged Africa and had an opportunity to work in Africa, still in France and Europe, are telling their governments that the condescending approach, the imposition approach, or the paternalistic approach is not going to work. This relationship, it can be one-sided. It should be reciprocal. It should be give and take. And that's why Africa is shifting a little bit to those nations, as Russia is winning contracts and Russia is winning the strategic winnings in those particular regions. Most experts across the United States of America, and for those who understand Africa properly, want to dig deep and also explain the relevance of working in Africa as partner. It is difficult at times, but as the former ambassador, Ambassador Ray, who was once an ambassador in Zimbabwe and also in a number of African countries, clearly explains the importance of seeing Africa from a whole strategic options and why African countries also have their own interests. Let's listen to Ambassador Ray and we will close down this video in a moment. Like former Ambassador Charles Ray. Ambassador Charles Ray is an expert who brings to us rich experience in regards to this geopolitical perspective of the United States and also the continent of Africa. Ambassador Charles A. Ray is a member of the Board of Trustees and also chair of the African program at the Foreign Policy Research Institute. He served as the U.S. ambassador to the Kingdom of Cambodia and the Republic of Zimbabwe. In addition, he was the United States of America Consul General to the Ho Chi Minh City in Vietnam. During his diplomatic career, Mr. Ray served as the Deputy Chief of Mission in Freetown, Sierra Leone, and at consular posts in Guangzhou and also Shenzhen, China, and more importantly also in Chiang Mai, Thailand. He was diplomat in residence at the University of Houston during 2005-2006 academic year, responsible for outreach and recruiting at colleges and universities in South Texas. He has a broad understanding in regards to geopolitics.
He spent 3 decades in the U.S. Foreign Service with postings to Sierra Leone, China, Thailand, and Vietnam. He also served as the U.S. ambassador to Zimbabwe and Cambodia. My guest this week is Charles Ray. We sat down here in Washington. He spoke to me about what makes good diplomacy and good foreign relations in difficult times and difficult places. Here's our conversation. Ambassador Charles Ray, thank you so very much for your time, and thank you so much for coming in and talking to us. I want to get straight into it. When the U.S. strategy for Africa was launched just over a year ago, the Biden administration said it wanted to chart a new direction for U.S.-Africa relations. We've seen U.S. support for Africa to have a greater voice and greater representation in more global institutions, for example, the G8. That was something that actually materialized. And of course, there has been support for Africa to have a greater voice at the UN Security Council. That has not materialized. But we also saw relations between the United States and a key Africa partner, South Africa, come under some strain, going through a really rough time in recent months. And much of that has been over Pretoria's relationship with Moscow. When you look at the rhetoric around charting a new direction and what actually happens when Russia becomes part of the conversation, do you see a new direction?
I see the potential for a new direction. I think the key is to be realistic in what we can achieve as opposed to what we would like to achieve. I mean, aspirational in reality, or aspirations in reality, are sometimes separated by a chasm of misunderstanding. But it's really a matter of us educating ourselves more on the realities, on the complexities of Africa, and then moderating our expectations to accompany that. I mean, just the South Africa situation is a good example. South Africa, since 1994, has been essentially ruled by the ANC. The ANC was for a long time considered a terrorist organization by the U.S. government. It has been, from the beginning, a leaning to the left, associated with the South African Communist Party, supported by the Soviet Union. And those are historical facts and realities which I think sometimes we here in the United States forget. And one of the issues on the entire continent, in fact, that we need to really get our minds around is that first of all, and I know with the discussions lately about the age of our leaders, this might sound a little off kilter, but the fact is that the leadership in Africa is old. I mean, I don't know, the average age of the heads of state in Africa is, what, 65 or so? On a continent where the vast majority of the people are under 25. Now, the thing that we have to keep in mind is that those leaders of that age are the independents, the liberation generation, who are very much products of their history. And their history is, it was the Soviets, it was the Chinese who helped them gain their independence, while we, for what were to us at the time practical reasons, supported the European colonial masters. And I'm sorry, but if we expect people who lived through that to just suddenly completely forget it, we need to look at our own history and how many people in this country are still fighting the Civil War, who definitely weren't born or living during that period. And so we need to have a better understanding of the historical context of the people we're dealing with. You have some people in the ANC who I think are practical and see the economic benefits of close ties to the U.S. and the West. You have others who would just much prefer we send the money and we stay home, and who will never be pro-U.S. And as we've seen here in the U.S., a small vocal minority can drive the train.
This is an indication that the Western countries and Africa's geopolitical partners, in Europe in particular, and also in the United States and around the world, should see Africa as a continent with huge potential, not just as a region that has enormous problems to be solved and with a number of problems that needs solution. Africa is a continent that has emerged from a number of difficulties over the years, and the African nations are beginning to call the shot. So Russia is taking that strategic option to engage the African countries from a perspective that has never seen before. This sends shockwaves across Europe and the United States. More importantly, the region itself is beginning to wake up from the geopolitical challenges and economic problems that it has faced over the years. Hopefully, Africa can embrace this particular period and make use of it, and also to work with its partners from the win-win situation. We want to thank you for watching. We have a video coming up with regards to what has France done with regards to Russia's Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov's visit to West Africa, and we shall be looking forward to meeting you soon in our next episode. Have a good day. Bye-bye.